Greetings everyone, I'm Detective STARBORN, and I'm glad to see you on my YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you and enjoy watching. A girl went for a walk and disappeared without a trace. Her parents immediately sounded the alarm and turned to the police for help. But what began to happen next caused a wave of indignation among the residents of their small town. This mystery remained unsolved for almost 3 decades, and only quite recently, detectives managed to find out the truth, and in a rather unusual way. Danielle Hutchins was born on November 11, 1980, in the small American town of Alexandria, Minnesota. Soon she had younger brother and sister, after which their family decided to move to a town called Belgrade, Montana. It was located surrounded by mountains, far from large settlements. At the same time, tourism was quite well developed there. Mostly, people came there to ski on the slopes and go hiking in the mountains. Danielle's parents chose this place because they received a job offer in the ski patrol. For them, it was the perfect option since they loved spending as much time as possible in nature. This passion was passed on to their children, and the family constantly arranged various adventures for themselves. They skied, went hiking, fished, and boated on local rivers. Danielle was also fond of rock climbing, for which all conditions were created in these parts. At the same time, the girl managed to study excellently and quickly became one of the best students in her school. In the future, she planned to enter a medical university and become a bioengineer. On September 21, 1996, a traditional festival was to be held in their town. People gathered together on the streets, listened to music, watched various performances, and just had fun. Danielle, who was 15 at the time, planned to go there with friends closer to the evening, but before that, she had a few free hours. The girl decided not to stay at home and go for a walk along the route along the river that ran near the city. Her mother asked her daughter to come back by 2 o'clock in the afternoon and gave her her wristwatch since she didn't have her own. Danielle took a bottle of water with her and left the house at 11:30, promising her mother to return on time. But the agreed time passed, and the girl never showed up. Her mother immediately began to worry, since they were supposed to have guests. In the end, she decided not to waste time and go to that route to call her daughter home. The woman called a friend with her, and they drove together to the parking lot where the trail began. The first thing they saw, there was a parked white pickup truck that Danielle was driving. Despite the fact that she was only 15 and the law did not allow her to drive a car without the presence of adults, her parents sometimes allowed her to use the car. Their town was small and quiet, without heavy traffic, and Danielle drove the car quite well. Mom immediately noticed that the car doors were not locked. She and her friend went out on the trail and walked towards the river, but almost immediately saw Danielle's keys and her water bottle on the ground. The woman began to worry even more and began to call her daughter by name, examining the entire route from the parking lot to the river. Having not found her daughter, she decided to immediately seek help from rescuers and the police. At that time, the woman allowed that Danielle could have fallen off some slope or received some other injuries. Considering that she did not have a mobile phone, the woman went to the police station, and after about an hour, search groups arrived at the scene. They combed the hiking trails, the wooded area adjacent to it, examined the riverbank, but they could not find Danielle. Closer to night, when the temperature dropped to almost below zero, the rescuers decided to stop the search until the next morning. However, the girl's relatives refused to return home and continued to look for her. They were assisted by family acquaintances and other local residents who split into groups and went to comb the area. In one of these groups was a man and his 2 sons who were friends with Danielle's sister. They went to the wooded area near the shore, examining it with the help of flashlights. Walking a few hundred meters from the parking lot, they noticed something strange in the river and came closer. Shining into the water, they realized that it was Danielle's body. She was lying not far from the shore, where the water level was only a few dozen centimeters. The man immediately realized that she was dead and ran to his car to get to the police station. But on the way, he saw the car of Danielle's father and told him this heartbreaking news. The police examined the body and handed it over to medical experts who needed several days to prepare a report on the causes of death. Nevertheless, the sheriff immediately stated that, apparently, they were dealing with an accident. There were no wounds or other signs of murder on the body of the deceased, so the police believed that she could have accidentally fallen into the river and drowned. Danielle's family, devastated by the news of her death, could not believe it. From a very early age, the girl spent time hiking, knew the wild nature well, and knew this place along the river very well. In addition, the parents did not understand how she could have drowned in that part of the river where the depth was so small. Despite this, the sheriff adhered to the version of the accident, so he did not investigate this case in any way. But everything changed when the medical experts presented their report. They found many scratches and abrasions on Danielle's body that looked like defensive wounds. In their opinion, she was trying to fight someone off. They also noted the fact that the victim's underwear was pulled down. It was extremely difficult for experts to imagine a scenario in which this would happen during an accident. Moreover, they found that the victim was raped, and a biological sample of an unknown man was found on her underwear. Regarding the cause of death, the experts concluded that Danielle had indeed drowned. But apparently, someone was holding her under the water. In addition to all this, they noticed that the watch on Danielle's hand was almost next to her elbow. The experts suggested that the criminal could have been dragging the victim's body to the river, holding her by the arms, as a result of which the watch slid down. But despite all these discoveries, for some reason the experts indicated the cause of death as undetermined. They understood that the girl had drowned, but did not find enough confirmation that it was a deliberate murder. For this reason, the police never started a full investigation, insisting that they were still not sure what happened to Danielle. Nevertheless, they still tried to establish more details about what happened. When forensic experts examined the victim's clothing, they found 4 hairs on the underwear that also belonged to an unknown man. In their opinion, these were hairs from the hand, and a partial DNA sample was extracted from them. However, at that time, there was not yet a common FBI genetic database. The only thing the experts found was that the hair belonged to the same person as the semen sample from the victim's underwear. The police also re-examined the area near the place where the body was found and found a male shoe print on the ground there, but they still could not establish whether it had anything to do with the case. In addition, investigators talked to several suspects who, in their opinion, could have done something like this, but this also led nowhere. The problem was that they could not even compare their DNA samples with the one found on the victim's clothes, since it was partial. It is noteworthy that many details of this case were kept secret, not only from the townspeople, but also from the relatives of DNA. For some time, they did not even know that she had been raped. From their point of view, it all looked as if the police really did not know what exactly happened to Danielle, and they were trying to find out. Despite the sheriff's position, some police officers were puzzled by the fact that this case was not reclassified as a murder and was not investigated accordingly. One of them was Cindy Botek, who began working in the police shortly before Danielle's death. The woman took part in this investigation and from the first days was sure that they were dealing with a murder. However, in those years, she did not have enough authority to conduct a full investigation, contrary to the opinion of the authorities, so she could only think about what could have happened that day. One of the versions was that the murder could have been committed by someone from among Danielle's acquaintances. Botek talked to her parents, but they could not imagine anyone who could wish their daughter harm. The girl never had problems with her classmates or anyone else among the local residents. For many months after Danielle's death, there was practically no progress in this case. The police continued to consider various suspects, interview people, but due to the sheriff's position, a full investigation was never carried out. Some officers, including Botek, were surprised by the fact that this case was never reclassified as a murder, and no one was looking for the criminal. For them, It was quite obvious that someone had attacked the victim, and this person could calmly continue to live among them. A few years after the murder, the police tried to enter a partial DNA sample found on the victim's body into the FBI database, but there were no matches there. In subsequent years, Danielle's relatives gradually learned more and more details about this case, including the fact that the victim was raped. They were outraged that the sheriff did not investigate this case as a murder and hid such details from them. However, the sheriff himself later began to say that he had never considered what happened as an accident and had always thought that it was a murder. These statements were at odds with his words, which were previously cited by local newspapers. There he directly said that the police did not have sufficient grounds to consider what happened as a murder. He said the same to Danielle's parents, who remembered it well. As a result, the sheriff's actions caused them even more outrage and misunderstanding. He also tried to blame it all on the report of medical experts, insisting that the only reason for refusing to conduct a full investigation was the fact that they indicated the cause of death as undetermined. But the girl's parents and other residents of the city believed that this way the sheriff was simply trying to remove responsibility from himself. Everyone understood perfectly well that conducting a full investigation in the first days after the murder could have helped solve this case and find the culprit, but he was practically not searched for. Now, many years later, finding the killer by cold leads was much more difficult. Danielle's parents tried to achieve a fair investigation, but all their attempts led to a dead end. Later, her younger sister joined them, who for many years gave interviews to local media, tried to reach out to investigators and, in general, do everything possible so that the person guilty of Danielle's death would be found. In 2019, 23 years after the murder, her relatives still managed to get the investigation reopened. However, this did not bring any tangible results. There were still no matches in the FBI genetic database. Rechecking old suspects led nowhere, and the case stalled again. This continued until 2021, until a new sheriff appeared in the local police department. The man took up service as a police officer just a few days before Danielle's death, and all these years, her case haunted him. He, like some of his colleagues, was initially sure that the victim had been killed, and now he had the authority to conduct a full investigation. Nevertheless, after so many years, he had practically no leads, except for a partial DNA sample of a possible criminal. Then the sheriff decided that this case required a fresh approach and attracted two outside experts to it. One of them was a former investigator from California who worked as a private detective, and the second was a DNA specialist. Together, they focused on trying to find the owner of the hair and biological material from the victim's underwear. First, they sent these samples to a California laboratory where they had some of the most modern DNA testing tools, and waited. Around the same time, in August 2023, Danielle's case was officially reclassified as a murder. It took almost 27 years for this. A few months later, in the first half of 2024, experts from the laboratory contacted the investigators and said that they had not been able to get closer to finding the owner of the DNA. However, the experts still did something. Their tools allowed them to extract a full DNA sample, which was at least some progress. As a result, the investigators transferred these samples to another laboratory in Virginia, hoping that they would be able to help them find the DNA owner using genetic genealogy. A few months later, they received a long-awaited call. Experts from the laboratory said that they decided to upload a sample of the criminal's DNA to publicly available genetic databases, where people independently add their samples to search for relatives. Such databases quite often help to find criminals by their pedigree, using genetic genealogy, but this time, everything was different. To the surprise of the experts themselves, they immediately received a complete match. It turned out that the DNA owner entered his sample there of his own free will, which happens quite rarely. This person was 55-year-old Paul Hutchinson, who lived in a small town called Dillon, 100 miles from Danielle's town. Detectives found out that at the time of the murder, he was 27, and he was studying at the University of Montana, just 10 miles from Belgrade. He He received a biological education, after which he got a job at the Montana Bureau of Land Management. Paul also had a wife and 2 children. At the same time, the man had no criminal history. He did not even have the slightest offenses. Now that the police had established the identity of the suspect, they needed to get a direct DNA sample from him. On July 23rd, they went to his work to talk to him. Driving up to the bureau building, they saw Paul and his colleagues outside. The investigators said they wanted to ask him a few questions at the station, and according to them, the man's face turned white in front of their eyes. Nevertheless, he agreed to go for interrogation. The detectives decided to act slowly, and at first began to ask questions about other unsolved cases that occurred in the county. Paul reacted quite calmly, but as soon as they showed him a photo of Danielle, everything changed abruptly. The man began to get very nervous and sweat, scratch his face, and even chew his own hands. In addition, he could hardly stand on his feet and even stumbled over a chair trying to get up from it. For the police, it looked almost like an unequivocal confirmation of his guilt. However, the man denied his involvement in the murder. However, his confession was not necessary. The investigators took a sample of Paul's DNA and then handed it over to the laboratory. At the same time, the man was released home, since until the results were obtained from the laboratory, they did not have sufficient grounds to bring charges of murder. After the interrogation, the detectives contacted Danielle's sister and said that they had finally tracked down the killer. They added that the police had no doubts about his guilt, and the DNA analysis should only confirm this. The victim's sister, who had been waiting for this moment for almost 28 years, was glad that the culprit would be deservedly punished. At the same time, she understood that they would have to go through a long trial to put an end to this case. However, everything went very differently than she expected. The next day after the interrogation, when the police were supposed to receive the results from the laboratory, something rather unexpected happened. Early in the morning, Paul called the police station of his city and said that he needed help. He told the operator his location and then hung up. When the patrol officers arrived at the scene, they saw Paul's car on the side of the road. The man himself was inside. He was dead, and a pistol lay next to him. During the investigation, detectives concluded that the man had done it himself. There was no note in the car, but his motives were quite obvious. Apparently, Paul realized that he would not be able to avoid prison, from where he would never get out. For his wife and children, what was happening came as a real shock. None of them, of course, knew what the man had done almost 30 years ago. Moreover, they did not even know that he was being interrogated by the police. Paul's relatives learned this simultaneously with the news of his death. Paul's acquaintances and colleagues were also shocked when the truth about him became known. They all considered him an exemplary family man and a good friend who could be relied on. Nevertheless, the investigators had no doubts that the man was involved in the murder, not at all. In August 2024, they held a press conference at which they announced that his DNA sample completely matched the samples found on the victim's underwear. According to the police, this crime occurred spontaneously. They found no evidence that the girl could have known Paul. Most likely, she stumbled upon the man when she arrived at that trail, and he decided to rape her, after which he committed the murder so that the victim would not identify him. Danielle's relatives admitted that the news of Paul's death caused them relief rather than annoyance at the fact that he would not spend the rest of his life behind bars. They were much more outraged by the fact that the criminal could have been caught several decades ago if the local sheriff had taken this case seriously. In that case, Paul would not have had the opportunity to live almost 30 years in freedom, start a family, and enjoy a quiet life. Paul's wife also expressed her condolences to Danielle's family and stated that she in no way supports or justifies his deed, and if he were alive, he would have to bear the deserved punishment. Share your opinion about this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching this video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I look forward to your comments on this situation. That was Detective STARBORN. See you soon.